The turkey was still 20 minutes from coming out of the oven when I decided I should have stayed home. I remember checking my watch on my son's porch, some old habit from 30 years of job sites, and thinking, "You've got time to turn around, Daniel. Nobody's seen your truck yet." I didn't turn around. I never do. That's probably always been my biggest fault, and my only real virtue, depending on who you ask. My name is Daniel Whitfield. 72 years old, retired electrician out of Richmond, Virginia, 34 years with the same union local. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago this coming March, and since then, Thanksgiving at my son Ethan's house has been the one holiday I actually look forward to, mostly because of my granddaughter Poppy. She's 8. She still thinks I hung the moon, which is more than I can say for most of the adults at that table. Ethan married a woman named Claire about 4 years back. Good woman mostly. Overwhelmed a lot of the time, which I understand. Married into money the way she did. Her mother is Vivian Castellano, and if you've ever met someone who could make you feel underdressed while wearing your funeral suit, you have a rough idea of what Vivian's like. I'd been on the receiving end of her particular brand of charm for 4 straight Thanksgivings by that point. And I want to be honest with you, most of it I let roll off. You reach a certain age, you stop needing people to think well of you. You just want the pie and the grandkid. What I didn't walk in with that day was a plan. I want to make that clear right up front, because everything that happened later might sound calculated looking back on it, and it wasn't. Not at the start. I had exactly one thing on me that mattered, folded up small in my jacket pocket, and I hadn't decided yet whether it would ever leave that pocket at all. Here's the piece you need before the rest makes sense. 6 weeks earlier, my neighbor Alma Fenwick, 79 years old, widow, had knocked on my door in tears holding a stack of paperwork she didn't understand. She'd been convinced to move nearly $300,000, her entire nest egg, into something called a legacy bridge fund. Private, exclusive, guaranteed returns. The whole pitch. The woman who'd sat at Alma's kitchen table with the folder and the warm smile and walked out with her signature was Vivian. I didn't confront anybody right then. I'm an electrician, not a lawyer, so I did what I know how to do, which is trace a circuit back to its source. I called a retired detective I used to play cards with, a guy named Rollins, and I asked him quietly to look into it. 6 weeks later, Rollins had 4 names, 4 widows, 3 counties, just under $1.1 million, all funneled through a fund that, as far as anybody could tell, didn't actually invest in anything at all. So that's what was folded up in my jacket pocket walking into that dinner. Not a plan, just a fact, waiting to decide when it wanted to matter. I should tell you a little more about Alma, because she matters to this story beyond just the paperwork. She and Carol had been close for almost 20 years, the kind of neighborly friendship built on borrowed sugar and shared tomato plants and Sunday phone calls that could run an hour easy. After Carol passed, Alma was the one who started leaving casserole dishes on my porch every couple of weeks without ever making a production of it. She never once asked how I was doing in that pitying way people sometimes do. She just showed up with food and left before I could properly thank her. So when she knocked on my door that afternoon in September, hands shaking, holding papers she couldn't make sense of, I felt something in my chest go cold and steady at the same time. The way it used to when I'd trace a bad circuit back through a wall and finally find the short. Rollins and I had worked together on nothing more serious than a poker table for 15 years, but he still had his instincts, and he still had contacts. He didn't charge me a dime for the 6 weeks of work, just said he'd always hated people who preyed on folks too polite to ask hard questions. By the 3rd week, he had bank records. By the 5th, he had a pattern so clean, it could have been a textbook case. Vivian, always approached through a charity connection first, a garden club, a grief support group, a senior center bake sale. Somewhere trust already had a foothold before she ever asked for a signature. I want to be honest about something else too. Part of me hoped I'd never have to use what Rollins found. Part of me kept telling myself I'd hand it quietly to the state attorney general's office after Thanksgiving. Let the professionals handle it clean and slow, and Vivian would simply disappear from holiday dinners the way people do when circumstances catch up with them. I didn't walk into that house looking for a confrontation. I walked in hoping, foolishly maybe, that I could just get through one more dinner and let the truth arrive on its own schedule. Vivian, as it turned out, had other plans for how the evening would go. Vivian found me in the living room before I'd even had a chance to set down the wine I'd brought. "Daniel," she said, looking at the bottle like it had personally offended her. "Still bringing the grocery store label, I see. Bless you for trying." I said Happy Thanksgiving and left it there. Ethan gave me a tired hug that told me he'd already had a rough afternoon of his own, and Claire waved from the kitchen with flour on her hands. The one genuinely warm thing in that house besides Poppy, who came flying around the corner a second later and nearly knocked me over. "Grandpa, I made a name card for you. It's got a turkey drawn on it. His name is Gerald." "Well, I'm honored to sit next to Gerald," I told her, and for about 90 seconds, everything felt fine. Dinner started civil enough. Vivian talked about a trip to Portugal, about the renovation on her lake house, about a charity gala she was chairing next spring for senior financial literacy, which, if you can believe it, she said with a completely straight face while looking directly at me. I nearly choked on my green beans. It was somewhere around the sweet potatoes that she turned her attention my way properly. "Daniel, I have to ask, that truck of yours out front, is that the same one from last year?" "Same one," I said. "Runs fine." "Of course it does." She smiled at Claire's brother across the table, like she was inviting him to laugh along. Some men just never see the point in wanting more for themselves. It's charming in its way, simple. "I've had enough in my life, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's different than having little." Something shifted behind her eyes right then, quick and gone just as fast, but I saw it. What she didn't know, sitting there enjoying her little dig, was that folded up in my jacket, not 10 feet away, sat the beginning of the end of her charity gala career. Poppy tugged my sleeve around then, whispering that she'd recorded a video for school about people who help others. And did I want to see it later? I told her absolutely, and I want you to hang on to that detail, because it comes back around, though not in the way anybody expected that night, mine included. The real trouble started when I stood to help clear plates. Old habit. You spend a career doing things with your hands. Sitting still through a meal doesn't come naturally. "Oh, don't trouble yourself," Vivian said. A little too loud, a little too sharp. "We do have a dishwasher, Daniel. I know in your day everybody did everything the hard way." "I don't mind helping." "Sit," she said, and that word landed differently than the rest, harder. "Honestly, you don't need to perform gratitude for a meal you were only invited to out of family obligation." Obligation. That one landed exactly as hard as she meant it to. I set the plate back down slow. "I think I understand my welcome here well enough," I said. "Do you?" She stood too, and something in the way she rose told me we'd crossed into territory we weren't coming back from easily. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent 4 years acting like this family owes you something for simply existing near it." Ethan, quiet through most of dinner, finally lifted his head. "Vivian, that's enough." "Is it?" She rounded on him instead. "Or are you finally going to admit your father embarrasses you at every single one of these dinners?" What happened next took maybe 2 seconds, start to finish, though it stretched a lot longer than that every time I've replayed it since. Vivian crossed the space between us and slapped me across the face, hard enough my ear rang and the room tilted sideways for a beat. The sound of it seemed to hang in the air a lot longer than it should have. Nobody moved. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan half rose out of his chair, and then, God help him, he sat back down. "That," Vivian said, straightening her blazer like she just finished something unpleasant but necessary. Is for 4 years of disrespect under my daughter's roof. I held my cheek and looked at my son. Just looked. Waited. Dad, he finally said, let's not blow this up bigger than it needs to be. I've been hit harder in my life. Believe it or not, union job sites aren't always gentle places, but nothing hit quite like my own son telling me not to make a fuss about it. That's when Poppy's voice cut through the frozen room, small and absolutely certain. Grandma hit Grandpa, she said. Not a question. A fact. The way only a kid states a fact, without any of the adult instinct to soften it into something easier to swallow. Poppy, sweetheart, go to your room, Claire said, voice shaking. But it's on my video, Poppy said. The room went very still. What video? Vivian's whole voice changed. The honey gone out of it in an instant. Poppy held up her tablet. I was recording for my school project about helpers. I wanted the whole table talking in the background. It's been going since before dessert. Vivian lunged for that tablet so fast she knocked her wine glass clean off the table. But I stepped in front of my granddaughter without even deciding to, the way you step in front of a swinging door without thinking. You won't be touching that, I said. For one long moment, everybody in that room believed the worst thing that could still happen was that video getting out. They had no idea there was something considerably bigger sitting in my jacket pocket, and that Vivian's hand had just made the decision for me about whether it stayed there. I reached in and pulled out one folded page, just the one, and set it down in the empty space where Vivian had been sitting. Since we're sharing things tonight, I said, you might want to take a look at this before you worry too much about a second grader's homework. Vivian's face went the color of the tablecloth. What is that supposed to be? Signature page, I said. Alma Fenwick, Legacy Bridge Fund. Ring any bells at all? The silence that followed was a different kind than the one after the slap. You could hear the refrigerator humming clear from the kitchen. I don't know what you're talking about, Vivian said, though every ounce of her earlier confidence had already drained straight out of her voice. I've got 3 more folders sitting in my truck, I said. Alma's not the only widow you talked into signing over her retirement to a fund that, best anybody can tell, doesn't actually invest in one single thing. A retired detective friend of mine has been building the file for 6 weeks. Wasn't planning on bringing it up tonight, truth be told. Figured I'd let it go through proper channels quietly. But you put your hand on my face in front of my granddaughter, so quiet doesn't feel especially necessary to me anymore. Ethan's head came up sharp. Dad, what are you talking about? Ask your mother-in-law what she does with her Tuesday afternoons, I said. Ask her about Legacy Bridge. Ask her why 4 widows in 3 counties handed over their life savings after a nice cup of coffee in their own kitchens. Claire had gone white as the tablecloth herself. Mom, tell them that isn't true. Vivian opened her mouth, and for the first time all evening, nothing clever came out. Nothing came out at all. Poppy looked up at me, tablet still clutched in both hands. Grandpa, is Grandma a bad guy? I knelt down to her level, cheek still burning where the slap had landed. Sometimes grown-ups do things that hurt other people, sweetheart. And sometimes the folks who love them have to decide whether to keep quiet about it or tell the truth. I decided a good while back I was done keeping quiet. Ethan stood slowly, looking between his mother-in-law and me like he was watching 2 different versions of his life collide head-on. Dad, is this real? Is this actually real? Call the detective yourself, I said, sliding Rollins' card across the table. Ask him what he found going through Alma's bank statements. Ask him about the other names he's already confirmed. Vivian found her voice again, thin now, and desperate in a way I'd never once heard from her. This is a misunderstanding. Daniel's confused. He doesn't understand modern financial products. I understand $300,000 disappearing out of a widow's savings into a fund with no license, No registered office, and not one client who's ever seen a dime of return, I said. I understand that just fine. The weeks that followed moved faster than any of us expected. Once Rollins's file went formal, 2 more victims turned up inside a week. Vivian was charged with securities fraud and financial exploitation of the elderly before the month was out. Poppy's video, the slap itself, ended up mattering a lot less than anybody at that table imagined it would, because it got swallowed up fast by warrants and court dates and a very different set of news cameras than the ones showing up for charity galas. Ethan called me nearly every day that first month, asking how long I'd known, why I hadn't said something sooner. I told him the truth. I wasn't ready to blow up his marriage over something I hadn't finished confirming, and I sure hadn't planned on revealing any of it that particular night. Vivian made that decision for both of us the second her hand connected with my face in front of an 8-year-old. Claire filed for divorce about 4 months later, once it became impossible to keep pretending she hadn't known more than she'd let herself admit. I won't sit here and tell you that part didn't complicate things where Poppy's concerned. Some nights I still lie awake wondering if there'd been a gentler way to let it all come apart. But then I remember the sound of that slap, and my own son sitting back down in his chair instead of standing up. And I remind myself Gentle had already been tried for 4 straight years running, and it hadn't gotten anybody anywhere at all. Alma got most of her money back eventually, restitution and a settlement that took the better part of a year to work through the courts. She still comes by my porch some evenings, casserole in hand out of pure habit even though there's no real reason for it anymore. And we sit out there and talk about nothing much, the weather, her grandkids, whatever's on the radio. After everything, that particular kind of quiet feels like exactly what I'd been missing without fully realizing it. Rollins retired from consulting entirely after that case closed. Said one good outcome was a fine enough note to end a career on. I still see him Thursday nights for cards. Same table we've used for going on 20 years now. And neither of us has ever needed to bring up Vivian's name again. Some things you handle once, properly, and then you let them rest. There was a stretch there, right around the divorce filing, where I wondered if I'd end up losing Poppy in the fallout the way you sometimes lose grandkids when a marriage comes apart messy. Claire, to her credit, never let that happen. She told me once, a few months after everything settled, that she'd spent years making herself small around her own mother, without ever quite noticing she was doing it, and that watching her daughter refuse to do the same thing at that dinner table was the thing that finally woke her up. I believe her. I've watched her rebuild something steadier since then, on her own terms. Poppy calls me every Sunday like clockwork. Couple weeks back she asked if she could interview me for a new school project. This one about people who tell the truth, even when it costs them something. Told her I'd need to think on what exactly I wanted to say. Truth is, I already know. I'm going to tell her the bravest thing a quiet man can do sometimes is wait exactly long enough, and not 1 second longer, before he finally stops staying quiet. If any part of tonight found you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth at your own table, I'd be curious which one you'd have picked.